Hey, what's up everyone? It's Phil from Team Cerberus in some terrible lighting, bringing you the event report for Small Bots of Mass Destruction held February 13th and 14th at the Martin County Fair in Stuart, Florida. And this was my first event, like real event, in quite a long time. I had the one that was at work that I kind of organized. It wasn't a quote-unquote real event because it was, a private thing, I guess. I don't know. I don't feel like it counts as a real event as terms of a normal robot combat event. And then like the previous two events I went to were Dragon Con robot battles, which are, they're real events, but they're weird compared to normal. So yeah, it's been a while since I was like what I would consider a normal robot combat event. I brought two robots. I brought my 1-pounder World Maggot, which I've done a full build report on. I guess not really a full build report because I glossed over quite a lot because I had some emergency rebuilding to do at the end there that I just didn't have time to film. But it's up there if you want to go check that out. And then I also had my 3-pounder Slasher, and that one I did not film because that was also an emergency last-minute rebuild. But I did film a quick little clip showing what it was before it went to battle because I kind of knew it wasn't going to survive. So you can check that out right now. This is Slasher. This is basically what was going to be Demon Spawn with another vertical setup that I wasn't happy with, mixed with part of the saw arm for the modular version of Demon Spawn, and then completely reworked to make a dedicated saw bot. And despite starting this less than a week before the competition, or actually probably about exactly a week before the competition, like to the hour, I really wanted to theme this thing out a little bit and give it, a look that fit what I wanted. So, I'm a hardcore horror movie fan, and I wanted to kind of give it a horror aesthetic here. So I've carried that over even to having a bit of a themed weapon cover. So this is just, it's a foam piece to cover the sharp edges of the saw while it's moving around. But I, added some like mesh in there so you can kind of see the saw through it. And then this thing will just slide off the saw. I'll probably use a clamp to make sure, nothing's rotating or anything, but still, I was just happy about that. But yeah, multiple different saws. This one is probably something I'm going to use against things with armor that's not like basically not metal, I guess. But I think I'm going to be able to hit a lot of like plastic or 3D printed something, because that would normally be plastic too, right? I'm going to go with this thing probably just because it looks mean. But I do have some diamond edge saws to go through metal if I have to. This is all on a prop drive 35, or I think that's what that was. So just direct drive using the FingerTech hub. Nothing too fancy here. Direct drive to a servo back here. Ideally, I would have made a setup with gears or something, but this had to be kind of quick and easy. This is what I used on Demon Spawn previously. I kind of weathered up the saw a little bit and the arm and bits of the armor here, but I needed to add this thing. Basically, I realized that if the arm went too far back, the robot was flipping over onto its backside, and I couldn't self-right. Like I could drive around still, but I was just stuck floundering around on my back, which would just suck in a fight. So I added a little wheelie bar, and I kind of based it off of the hunting knife used in the movie Scream. It's aluminum, so it's not actually sharp or anything. Watch me do that and slice my hand up, but no, it's dull as hell. But I did polish it. It's been a theme of my robots for this event, just to give it a little bit of contrast to like the dirty rest of everything else. And this thing, you can see it's got a bit of a mirror finish there. So when the arm goes back, it kind of becomes the wheelie bar. It's really cool because it actually pushes down. It could kind of lose a little traction, but if I let it just kind of rest itself down on the floor, it becomes a perfect thing to kind of stabilize the bot. I've got two different top plates here to help with maintenance, and the front one is Lexan, and I actually painted on the name of the robot and sanded the backside of it so it's kind of more opaque, so the light diffuses through this thing. It looks really cool when the status lights inside are on. I have some spring steel wedgelets here. I may cut down the center wedgelet because I'm kind of thinking this might not do so well. And I do have an alternate piece I need to build for the sides to replace these for certain fights, but I just, I need to do that now, I guess. But yeah, that's basically where we're sitting with this robot. Like I said, I just wanted to document it before it gets torn to bits because I feel like that's coming. And I guess I'll put the elephant in the room out there right before we get into any of this. It is the era of COVID, and it was kind of, unusual to go to an event like this in those circumstances. I will say, I think Kurt, Abra, and their whole crew did a really great job of getting everything set up. I think about as good as it could have been for an event like this. Everybody had a private pit table, which is kind of amazing. I kind of am disappointed that I know that's not going to be a thing once we're out of this mess, but Yeah, it had a private pit table with plenty of space in between the tables. Builders were, of course, roped off from the general public. There's a side of the arena dedicated for just the drivers, which they were limiting. I think you could have like 2 people up there per team at a time. And then whoever was actually running, everything for the timer and the ring and all that. They did temperature checks at the beginning of every day. They gave every team a little like COVID pack that had like hand sanitizer, cleaning wipes, extra masks, gloves, all that stuff. So in terms of that kind of stuff, I think they did a really, really good job trying to take as many precautions as possible. I made sure I kind of quarantined myself for the weeks leading up to it, and I'm, back having as little human contact as at all possible now, just to make sure everything's good. So I'm being a, responsible person or whatever. But yeah, enough of that crap. Let's get into the fights. So here you see the state of the 2 robots. So it doesn't look so great right now. I will say that Slasher was kind of disassembled a little bit by me at the event in an attempt to get it running for a grudge match. We'll get into that a little later. So it's not quite as bad as it looks, but it's not too far off either. So I'm going to go through the fights in chronological order because I think that kind of makes the most sense right now. So we're going to start off with World Maggot here on the right, my 1-pounder. The first fight was up against Phantom Assault, which is a vertical spinner. Definitely not the ideal bot I wanted to fight with this thing. The beginning of the fight was kind of just me like trying to jockey for position and try to get under them and get to a point where the weapon wasn't really having an easy time doing that. I was able to get under them a little bit with my front wedge kind of thing, but not really able to get a good grab. I had underestimated, actually with both of these robots, how much more driving practice I really needed, because driving against inanimate objects at home is one thing, but trying to drive against something that's trying to attack me at the same time and then actually work both the drive and the clamper lifter thing, it took a lot more concentration than I was really banking on. So after a while, he ended up hitting me a few times. He hit the claw directly on the top here and bent it about 90 degrees. And then it seemed like they got stuck on the floor. They kind of got to a point where they weren't moving anymore. I probably should have let him sit there and lose, but I went and kind of hit him a couple times, and eventually they were freed from the floor. However, looking back at the footage, it sounds like he might have been turning his remote on and off, so it may not have been anything I did. It may have just been kind of a reboot of the controller that let them start moving again. And after that point, they started getting some really solid hits in on me. They flipped me upside down, kind of got me in the corner, started grinding away on the bottom of the robot. I was also reminded that this thing is not the easiest robot in the world to self-right. It can do it, but it kind of relies both on moving the claw into the right position and using the drive to flip itself back over. It won't really cleanly self-right with just the weapon, so that is a bit of a design flaw there. And honestly, I never really got it self-righted. I kind of got onto one wheel and I was able to crab walk a little bit, and eventually they hit me again and put me back on my wheels. Phantom Assault eventually hit me again, put me flat on my back. There were some wires hanging out. I'm not entirely sure which wires they were. I believe they were to one of the drive motors, if I remember right, and at that point I couldn't really get anything to work. I was worried that the battery might be exposed, so I tapped out. I should state that that fight for World Maggot was like at the very beginning of the ant weight brackets, and then over on pretty early in the beetle weight brackets, I had Slasher up against Phantom Cyclone, basically a drum spinner using the finger tech bar, and this fight did not last very long. I went across the arena at him, went head first into the weapon, got hit. I think I did like a full 360 flip and landed back on my wheels, but the saw arm completely detached from the robot. It was laying horizontally over top of it. The weapon motor was still working, so I spun that up to try to use it as a thwack tail, because what else was I going to do at this point? And this kind of put me in a situation where I wasn't really totally in control of what I was doing. I went to spin around and just had bad aim of everything. He hit me again. I think he completely ripped the arm off at this point. The saw blade detached from the motor, and I was pretty much done. I think that fight was less than 20 seconds. So at this point, being relatively early on in the event and having both bots get really destroyed, World Maggot aside from having the bent claw, it lost a bit of armor up here. You can kind of see it's covered by tape now. Lost a bit of the leg stand. I had some chunks taken out of things. I lost one of my Silver Spark motors, which not only did I only have one backup of, also the way this thing's built, it wasn't really designed to be serviceable. So the motors were like glued into these printed motor mounts that I didn't have backups of. The threaded inserts had ripped out of the motor mounts. Like, it was a mess. So it was a really difficult replacement of that motor. And then Slasher, well, the insides were mostly okay. You know, it just come apart, and it kind of was showing me that the way I had mounted things was definitely not rigid enough. I knew that the servo was a weak link to begin with, but it was proving to be a weaker link than I even thought. And I just found myself being really frustrated at this point. And I was working to repair the bots, and I was just kind of in a bad mood and kind of like, oh, do I even bother trying to get these things working for a second fight? They're just going to get shredded again type thing. So I actually ended up just taking a break, getting lunch, sitting back down, kind of relaxing for a little bit and not worrying about the repair. And I think that was the best decision I could have made, because just stepping away for a few minutes got me back in the headspace I needed to be in, and I was ready to go get these things fixed up and get them ready to fight again. I think that's something I forget a lot of times at events, is I do tend to kind of just get hyper focused on what I'm doing and not give myself a chance to like just, you know, step away from it for a second. Sometimes you don't have the time luxury to do that, but you know, my fights have been early on, so I did have time to repair. And yeah, I'm more or less saying this for myself going forward more than anything else. So unfortunately, my second fight with World Maggot, I do not have good footage of. This was the first event I'd used an actual GoPro on my remote to film things. And I have to say, I'm pleased by the quality of the footage I got off of it. But honestly, the GoPro is relatively new to me, and I haven't played around with it all that much. So I screwed up the settings and accidentally put it on time-lapse mode instead of actual video mode. So all the footage I have of this fight is just time-lapse. I slowed it down in post, so it's a little more understandable what's going on, but it's still very choppy. But Rainbow Poison is another vertical spinner, so, you know, knowing that I had lost badly to one the previous fight, I wasn't having super high hopes for how this fight was going to go. And it pretty much started the same. I got the front of the robot hit quite a few times, the top claw bent a little bit again, and the lower left jaw bit bent at almost a 90-degree angle, pretty much about as far as it could bend before it hit the UHMW, making it really hard to get any kind of grip on Rainbow Poison at all. Eventually, I did manage to get around to the side of them and grab on to their wheel guards. Thankfully, instead of being like a low profile wedge style vertical spinner like Phantom Assault was, Rainbow Poison had a big gap between the front of the robot and the floor, with just kind of legs holding the blade off the ground. So it gave me a wheel guard that I could actually get the claw into. Unfortunately, because it was so high up, it wasn't really an ideal place to try to lift from. So I held on to him for a little bit, tried to do what I could, but obviously eventually I had to release him, and then he was able to come back and land some decent hits on me and eventually knock me out. I forget exactly what happened that stopped the robot, but I will say after the fight, when I went to go prep this thing for grudge matches, I found that both of my drive motors were completely gone. One just spins freely, so the gear was like no longer attached internally, and the other one just has this nasty audible grinding noise coming out of it. And as I mentioned before, I have no extras left at this point, so there was nothing I could really do with this bot beyond that point. Slasher's next and final fight was up against Sparrow, which I was really excited for because I feel like I'm cursed when it comes to fighting Luke, in that when we want to fight each other or we're scheduled to fight each other, something happens and the match never happens. Like either one of the bots just can't go on and has to forfeit, or I think one time there was like the event was running out of time and I forfeit the match because I was in bad shape, and it would help move the tournament along anyway, so I wasn't going to waste people's time with a limping robot. But this thing's really cool, a little wedge-fed vertical disc drumette style spinner. I also found out afterwards we're running basically the same internal components, same drive motor, same weapon motor. Obviously his is going through a reduction to an actual, like, you know, kinetic energy weapon versus a saw on mine. But yeah, the similarities in the way the robots were set up internally were kind of striking. He was able to get under me pretty easily, started grinding away at the bottom of the robot, eventually kind of flipped me over. The saw arm came off yet again and he got some decent hits in. And it got to the point where I was kind of floundering around. I couldn't really move, more or less knocked out. He asked if I want another hit. I said go for it. And he popped the whole robot up in the air. Parts started kind of flying off. He asked if I wanted another hit and I politely declined. I was good at that point. So honestly, I didn't think the damage from this was too bad. Some of the parts had kind of come out the top of the robot, but I figured it was more or less okay. It didn't seem like anything was too destroyed. And then as I started going through the robot, I found more and more parts that were broken. It was kind of hilarious. So this was the main saw I was using throughout most of the match. I have a new insert in the middle here, but he actually knocked the insert out of the disc that it needs to go to the adapter. I did not have the spare on me at the event because I had other ones that I thought would fit, but actually didn't. So this saw was out of commission. I did have some spare like diamond cutting saws, but this vicious looking saw was done. Obviously the saw arm was completely detached. Actually, if I pull that up here, you can see you rip the wires clean out of the servo. Servo is still attached to the arm, barely, but yeah, the servo no longer attached. I have not yet checked to see if that thing will work at all. I haven't bothered. Drive motor, you can see the axle on the gearbox is very clearly bent. This thing is completely seized up right now. I believe it looked like the motor would spin, so I think it's really just a case of having to replace the gearbox itself. So not too bad, but I only had the pair of motors in the robot, so I did not have a spare of that to put in the robot at all. Not really tons of damage done to the underside of the bot. He did rip off one of my spring steel wedges, but those were only riveted on because they had to be, because I needed some low profile to hold them on there. So basically I was taking the robot, trying to put it back together for grudge matches, rumbles, whatever. I realized I had only one drive motor, so that was kind of a problem. So I put it in this configuration you're seeing here, where I bolted the saw arm onto the side of the bot. The idea being I would just put the saw on there and run it as a second wheel. So I'd have two things to go forward, and then I'd have to like crab walk in reverse. But I figured it could be fun and stupid and whatever, grudge matches, who cares? And I got it all together, put it in the box, turned the power on, and smoke starts coming out of the robot. And I rewired this thing multiple times trying to figure out what was causing the smoke. And as far as I can tell, I think it is the weapon speed controller here. This seems to be what smoked or is shorted maybe internally on me, because that seems to be the only common link that I can find. I believe that was pulled out of the top of the robot towards the end of the fight, so it likely did take some damage. I did have a spare of that, but I was kind of at the point where I didn't want to risk doing any further damage to these components until I could really just take them and systematically test them. And I realized I would probably just have more fun on the day watching fights and enjoying watching robots destroy each other rather than just, smoke testing each individual component of the robot individually. So that's a project for another day. I'm hoping. It seemed like the drive ESCs were still working, but because of the smoking, I could never really get it to a state where I could test it. So while I do think the status lights were coming on the drive speed controllers, I will not be surprised if they somehow got smoked in the process as well. So once again, just have to go through everything individually and make sure it's safe. And just to show a little more of the damage on World Maggot, you can see that front arm really bent, the claw pretty bent as well, but this was after it straightened from the first fight where it was actually worse. Chunks taken out of the wheels, not a big deal. Got a good amount of damage to the Garolite there at the bottom, but actually held up better than I thought it would. I was honestly expecting it to crack like along this edge here, and while it did take some damage in there, it's not as bad as I thought it would be. One of the eyes here was removed, so that's just tape. So one of the front parts. That is one problem, of course, with bending Lexan, is that it can kind of tend to become brittle, so that's a bit of a problem. But overall, it physically survived okay. There's, I think, a couple little cuts in the UHMW as well, but not bad. There's some changes that need to happen here. I want to change up the gear ratio a bit. I want to rebuild the shape of it because it's not really efficient the way it's shaped right now. It's pretty clunky when it tries to turn and maneuver. I want it to be faster as well. But if I really wanted to, I think I could replace the claws and enter it, with a little bit of repair and have it going again. But I think it needs a better redesign to really be effective. So yeah, not my most successful outing in the least. Robots really could have done a lot better, but I had so much fun. Like I said, it's been a long time since I've done this in a real capacity. I told everybody if I knew last year I wasn't going to be able to compete after, I think, Fair Fights that I missed last year is probably the last event I had a chance to go to. I probably would have gone. I would have made myself get robots ready and go because I honestly just thought I'd have another chance later in the year that obviously didn't come. So massive thanks to Kurt, Abra, and their whole crew for putting on really, really great event. I really enjoyed myself. You know, it's also great to see all the other builders that I haven't seen in forever too. You know, just an overall good time for me. And I gotta say, typically after having, you know, a relatively long build cycle, I kind of started this right before Christmas, and, you know, so it's maybe about 2 months total of, you know, prep and build and everything, which I know for some people probably isn't all that long, but for me, that's a relatively intense thing, and I was working on it pretty much every weekend. But usually after an event, I'm ready to just kind of like relax for a little bit, not think about robots, kind of do some other stuff, and then get back when I'm ready for the next event or prepping for the next event. At this point, I don't know when the next event is, if there will be one anytime in the near future. You know, everything is so up in the air at this point. But I gotta say, I came home and like the next day I had, you know, a good chunk of CAD done on the new version of Slasher. I started prepping a new 15 pounder. Like, I am amped up to do some more robot stuff. I'm super excited about it right now. So I consider that a win. I am just ready to build something new, build something improved, and get back in the arena as soon as I can. So hopefully you'll be seeing some more kind of build progress things coming up, kind of debating how much I'll put out, you know, when I don't have an event pending, but I will try to share some stuff as I go and try to make some interesting content out of it, especially because I'm not going to be rushing, hopefully, as much. And I can actually spend a little more time filming things and working on things, not just making it a last minute, like, hey, here's all the random footage I had, let's put it in a video type thing. But yeah, so that's it for this one. I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.